From birth through growing pains to civil war and a humanitarian crisis, South Sudan marks its 4th year of independence with little to celebrate. So what can be done to bring peace to the world's youngest nation? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. July 9th, 2013 marked a moment of hope for South Sudan when it split from Sudan to become the world's newest nation. A chance to put behind decades of war and hostilities. But after barely 2.5 years of freedom, the country was plunged back into civil war. And it's been racked by fighting ever since. A report by the United Nations mission in the country said a recent upsurge in fighting has not only been marked by allegations of killing, rape, abduction, looting, arson and displacement, but by a new brutality and intensity. It went on. The scope and level of cruelty that has characterized the reports suggests a depth of antipathy that exceeds political differences. Well, let's go over how we got to where we are right now. As I said, the southern part of Sudan gained independence on July 9th, 2011, ending Africa's longest-running civil war. But fighting began in the capital, Juba, in December 2013, when President Salva Kiir accused his sacked deputy, Riek Machar, of planning a coup. It has served to split South Sudan along ethnic lines, broadly speaking, the Dinka communities supporting Kiir and the Nuer backing Machar. More than 2 million people are either in refugee camps or have fled abroad. There are no accurate figures on casualties, but estimates suggest tens of thousands have been killed. Al Jazeera's Catherine Soy has gained rare access to rebel-controlled areas of South Sudan and filed this report from Upper Nile State.
In this strategy meeting, South Sudan's rebel commanders weigh their options in the ongoing battle between their fighters and government troops in parts of the country. Generals and other influential individuals from both sides of the conflict have often been accused of being hardliners and hampering negotiations brokered by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development (IGAD) that are yet to achieve any peace.
Who is the first spoiler? Who is the first spoiler? Who is he? Is Salva Kiir or Riek Machar? His spoiler is somebody kill people or somebody run away.
So you don't consider yourselves hardliners or spoilers of the peace process as the generals on the ground?
Yes, because I don't even know the reason why even I was chased away in Juba, me myself.
They all say they want peace, but fighting is still going on despite a ceasefire. Peace talks are expected to resume. There will be a new proposal by IGAD on the formation of a transitional government. The commanders here say that they will not accept anything less than separate armed forces for at least 3 years. This general says that 18 months is not enough to heal wounds and build trust between the rival forces.
For the two armies to being trained and organized to come together again as a national army of South Sudan, that one will not be enough. And it will force people to fight again.
These men are all important advisors to their leader, Riek Machar. They say they'll follow his lead, but will not accept a deal that doesn't properly address the root cause of the conflict. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Mewut, in rebel-held Upper Nile State.
Well, South Sudan's foreign minister admits rebels have taken over some towns in the country, but speaking to Al Jazeera, he said that most of the country remains under government control.
We have got 10 states in the Republic of South Sudan. The 7 states are under complete quiet. In the towns, in the states of Upper Nile, Unity and Jonglei, the government controls all the major towns and major areas. The rebels only are in some few counties, not more than 3 or 4 counties out of those 3 states. So the country is completely under the government control. The system is running. The executive, the legislative structures and everything are running in South Sudan today.
So a conflict with a political, personal and ethnic dimension contributing to a humanitarian crisis. Let's bring in our guests for today's Inside Story. From South Sudan's capital, Juba, we have Elias Nyamlel Wakoson from the Ebony Center for Strategic Studies, a think tank promoting good governance in South Sudan. And from Northampton, Massachusetts, we're joined by Eric Reeves, a professor and Sudan historian at Smith College. Gentlemen, welcome. Elias, let's start with you. 4 years ago, there was such hope for South Sudan, the world's newest country. Today, it ranks lower in terms of human development than just about anywhere else on earth, according to the United Nations. Where is that hope now? Is there any cause for hope in South Sudan?
There is great hope for all the people. I mean, there has been, I call it an accident. This accident which has brought us into this crisis should never be thought to be going on forever. It is going to end, and then the development and all other things we had planned to do in this country will go on. Let me remind you of one thing. In my language, our people say, if two brothers fight, they don't have to break the water pot. Now, it is a very interesting thing to listen to this. When they are fighting, even the fighters, when they come near the pot, you want to throw the other, say, hey, don't throw me there, the pot will break. Because after they fight, they will come back and drink, both of them, tired, will come back and drink from the same pot. So they never break it. And this is what I think the cause of the crisis we have is that we are all fighting, but eventually we come and drink from the pot. Which is the pot? The South Sudan is the pot, which everybody will eventually come back and drink from it.
Eric Reeves, in Northampton, Massachusetts, this 18-month war in which tens of thousands have been killed has split the country along ethnic lines. Have those ethnic divisions always existed in South Sudan? Was it only a matter of time, do you think, before those ethnic divisions led to conflict? What I'm asking is if this conflict goes beyond mere political differences.
The ethnic conflicts have indeed existed since time immemorial. If we're considering cattle raiding, for example, but the explosion of violence that occurred in December 2013 was not expected by anyone. It took everybody by surprise. Its rapidity, its violence, its vehemence, and indeed its intense ethnic inflection. There is a history to this, and it goes back a lot further than 2013. And indeed, if we're going to do any history of how South Sudan got to its present state, we would have to go back to the year in which the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed, 2005. That's also the year in which South Sudan lost its brilliant and charismatic leader, John Garang, in a helicopter crash. That's what brought Salva Kiir to power. Salva was seen as a conciliator, but in that interim period, as it was called, between 2005, the referendum on self-determination in January 2011, and actual independence in July 2011, was a period in which the international community simply did not provide enough in the way of capacity building, support, structured financial assistance, oversight, particularly of oil revenues, which quickly became the source of massive corruption in the South. Much of the fighting is animated by ethnic differences, but I think it's important to remember that there are also divisions within the Dinka governing community and within the rebel movement. There are strong signs that several important rebel commanders, Simon Gatwich, Peter Gadet, Gabriel Tanguini, have broken with Riek Machar. Now, this means that Riek Machar no longer really has control of all the rebel commanders, if he ever did. And that's going to make it extremely difficult to negotiate peace. It's not merely ethnicity. It's personal ambition, it's greed, it's corruption They all exist.
Let's bring in Elias on that then. What do you make of what Eric was saying there, Elias? It's clear, isn't it, that the opposition isn't unified under Riek Machar?
Yes, he started by going back to 2005 and then about the helicopter crash. That was a tragic event for us. But anyway, we continued as the SPLM. We continued and we tried to set the government and everything. The transitional period was a difficult time because we didn't have any institutions. So it was a time of building institutions so that they can take care of the issues of the country. Now, he mentioned that there was tremendous support from international organizations, NGOs, in the period from 2005 maybe to 2011. Yes, true, there was tremendous help from them, and I hope they will continue with this help despite our crisis, because we shouldn't really tie assistance to South Sudan only to this crisis, because there are so many people who depend on this assistance and aid, and therefore it should continue so that we elevate their sufferings, especially those who are displaced from their places. This is the right time that we should give them aid. Concern about it is going to be very difficult whether Riek Machar, the rebel leader, is in control of all his forces. Well, staying in Juba here, I wouldn't know much about that. But if he is not in control, yes, I'm sure there will be some problems in negotiating and arriving at a peace. Because if he personally agrees to peace talks, maybe parts of his generals or those who defect from him may not be in agreement with his signing of a peace agreement, and they will continue with the civil war, whatever you want to call it. And now this is a real problem, because any group that stays out and fights the government will cause a lot of havoc to the people around them. Yes?
Elias, both President Kiir and Riek Machar have accepted collective responsibility for the crisis. To what extent, though, do they have to accept personal responsibility for the ongoing violence and suffering in the country?
In the Arusha agreement, I read the text of it, the SPLM has accepted collective responsibility for that. And actually, the SPLM is going to apologize to the people of South Sudan for what has happened. So there is an acknowledgement of a problem, there is an acceptance of collective responsibility, and this has been documented and signed by the SPLM uniting group. So they have accepted it, yes.
Eric, at least 7 ceasefires have been agreed and broken in the last 18 months.
Yes.
Why have the two sides not been able to reach agreement? Does it come down to two men, two egos, two differing political points of view? Is it all down to Kiir and Machar?
No, it's not, although that's often the way in which it is depicted in news broadcasts. It's very much the case that in Juba you have real divisions. You have a third party that's almost never discussed, and that is the so-called former 10 detainees, one of whom, Pagan Amum, was former Secretary General of the SPLM. He recently returned to Juba and was reinstated as Secretary General of the SPLM per the Arusha agreement of this past January. Now, what's unfortunate is that Riek Machar is not accepting the terms of this preliminary but very important agreement, the Arusha Accord. And that in itself is a very, very bad sign. I'd like to recur to a couple points that Elias made. I think he misunderstood me when I said it was the absence of sufficient humanitarian and development support in South Sudan during the interim period that's created many of the problems. There was a lack of institutional capacity that had to be filled almost immediately. Remember that South Sudan is a country that was never a country. If you fly over South Sudan, you will see very, very little, if any, infrastructure. There's no transportation infrastructure. There's no electrical grid. There is no modern economy. And there was a lot of oil revenue, and that revenue needed to be overseen very, very carefully. I think it's also the case that we do know that the rebels are divided, in some cases badly divided. And the letter that has asked President Omar al-Bashir to send aid directly to commanders like Peter Gadet and Simon Gatwich and Gabriel Tanguini is very, very dangerous. This would involve.
I want to come on, Eric,
Sudan
to the. I want to come on to the involvement of Sudan's neighbours in this conflict in just a moment. But first, Eric, perhaps you can answer succinctly for me. Why does the international community appear to be so powerless to stop the fighting? Why does there appear to be this climate of impunity in South Sudan?
The SPLA, when it became not a rebel guerrilla movement, but the governing force in South Sudan, this was an enormous transition, and it was not particularly well effected or overseen. The demobilization of massive numbers of SPLA soldiers was not well handled. And that's what created a situation in which, in the absence of institutional capacity, no history of governance within the country, this was a situation ripe for corruption and ultimately for violent explosion.
Okay, let's bring back in Elias. Elias, let me read you something here from the African Union. The continuation of hostilities in total disregard of the suffering of the people is tantamount to the abdication by the South Sudanese leaders of their most fundamental responsibility. An African Union inquiry recommended that they both be barred from office. Now, would that help or hinder the situation there in South Sudan?
You mentioned the African Union. The African Union is a continental organization that doesn't really have the muscle to do many things in Africa, in particular to conflict situation. Remember, the predecessor of the AU, the Organization of African Unity, had agreed that the colonial boundary should remain. And this is part of the problems we are having now, the colonial boundaries. Now they say there should be a collective responsibility towards, that is the AU, towards intervening in crisis if they cause serious crisis that will jeopardize the sovereignty of a country. Now, the AU does not have the military means or the means of implementing this. So they have been reduced to the role of mediators, try to mediate, to broker the peace agreement. Beyond that, there is nothing. If there is any way of stopping this conflict by force, then the AU will have to appeal to the United Nations Security Council to help them with material, with the necessary things. And I don't think that that is going to take place soon.
Okay, all right.
The international community, yes, wants the war to stop,
okay,
but they don't have the means of coming in and stopping the war, because people are still, there is a wide gap still between Riek Machar and the government in the country.
Well, there are so many statistics detailing just how bad things are in South Sudan, and here's another. 2/3 of the roughly 12 million strong population is said to be in need of food, medical or other aid. Here once again is Al Jazeera's Catherine Soy reporting on the plight of civilians.
Nyaluit Chol was fetching firewood in Jonglei State, northeast of here. She says she was ambushed by government soldiers. They allegedly stabbed and shot her multiple times before she was rescued and airlifted to this Red Cross health center in rebel-held Maiwut County. Her brother says the security situation is not what he expected when he celebrated independence from Sudan 4 years ago.
If you get independence but you're still dying, you can't be happy. If the conflict was not happening, I wouldn't be here. So how can I celebrate?
At another health center not too far away, Nyaluang Doth has her first medical checkup. She's days old and born in a country in turmoil. Her mother says she just wants her child to grow up in peace.
I want the two sides to come together. It's only the leadership that can bring peace so that our children can have a good future.
There's relative calm in this part of the oil-rich Upper Nile state, but many are poor and displaced. They receive humanitarian help, but the few aid agencies often have trouble getting supplies from the capital city, Juba. All these people will go home with nothing. Some have walked for hours to get to this distribution center. Most of them have been displaced from areas that are far from here, where fighting is still going on. Opposition leaders have been traveling across the continent in shuttle diplomacy before talks aimed at ending the conflict begin in Addis Ababa. As in government-controlled areas, life is tough for everyone here. Food prices have more than doubled. Tough restrictions imposed by the Ethiopian government at the border crossing has made it more difficult to import basic supplies. Many are cautiously hoping that this time round the talks will bring them lasting peace. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Pagak, in rebel-held South Sudan.
Eric, a travel ban and asset freezes are in place against 6 battlefield commanders, 3 from both sides. That appears to have had little effect on the ground. Would sanctions against Kiir and Machar be a more productive way to bring an end to this conflict? And what role, if any, do South Sudan's immediate neighbours have in bringing peace and stability to the country?
Currently, negotiations are under the auspices of IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, consortium of East African countries, which has neither the diplomatic nor the military capacity to oversee negotiations. To get back to the question of the extraordinary humanitarian crisis that has engulfed South Sudan, I think, among other things, I frankly don't think an embargo of any sort is going to be helpful under present circumstances. Most of the commanders, Peter Gadet, for example, who's been sanctioned, never leaves Sudan, has no intention of leaving South Sudan. But I think we also need to look at the role of Khartoum and Sudan, which is arming the rebels. A recent study by a British Armament Survey Group made very clear that there are weapons being dropped in airdrops in South Sudan by Khartoum, something that we've known has been going on for some time. You can't have one party, one country, Sudan, exacerbating violence while you have another consortium, IGAD, trying to tamp down that violence. So I think there should be a total arms embargo. I would not focus so much on individuals as on weapons. But an arms embargo to be effective would have to be symmetric, which means that rebels would no longer be getting assistance from Khartoum, even as we shut down military assistance to South Sudan.
Elias, give you the opportunity to come back on what Eric was saying there, but I want to end the programme, if I can, on a positive note. If there is anything, I have a feeling you're going to give me a positive note to end on here. I want to know where you think South Sudan will be in another 4 years from now. How do you see this playing out?
It all depends on the willpower of the people of South Sudan. If we have the willpower to stop, first of all, stop the war, stop the violence. And from there, we work on rebuilding our institutions. This takes time, because building institutions is not an overnight thing. You are creating a culture of something good. It takes time. But if these things are in place, I think 4 years from now, South Sudan will be a great country. We have now learned our lessons. I hope so, that we have learned our lessons. We have learned how to misuse our resources. We have learned how to neglect other areas which are of beneficial use to us, like agriculture. Now, once we get out of this war, we will put this knowledge that we have learned, that we did. We squandered a good chance in the past. It is now time no longer to joke.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid there we must end our discussion. Time has run away with us once again. From Juba, Elias Niamlal Wakoson, and Northampton, Massachusetts, Eric Reeves. Many thanks indeed for being with us. And thank you for watching. As always, we welcome your thoughts. You can get in touch through our programme page at aljazeera.com. Post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the whole team here in Doha. Bye-bye for now.